Welcome to this explainer. All right, we are diving right in today because we're unpacking something absolutely mind-bending. We're going to explore the wild, honestly almost unbelievable ways that our brains actively engineer and construct our conscious reality. You probably think you're just a passive observer of the world around you, right? Just taking it all in exactly as it is. But as we'll see through some really incredible research today, your brain is actually acting way more like a master film editor. It's constantly tweaking, filtering, and even faking the footage just to create that seamless experience you call life.
So let me ask you a question. Are you actually conscious of your entire surroundings right now? I mean, really think about it. When you're just sitting in your room, it feels like you're fully and completely aware of everything. The hum of your air conditioner, the feeling of the chair underneath you, the color sitting just in your peripheral vision, all of it at the exact same time. It feels like this high-definition, wide-angle, continuous broadcast. But cognitive scientists are discovering that this feeling, it's actually one of the most brilliant tricks your brain pulls on you. And this brings us to a concept researchers call the refrigerator light illusion. Think about someone who genuinely believes the light inside their fridge is on 24/7. Why would they think that? Well, because every single time they open the door to check, the light is shining. They just don't realize that the very act of opening the door is what actually turns the light on. And human consciousness operates in basically the exact same way. Your working memory can only hold a few tiny scraps of reality at any given moment. But the instant you check to see if you can hear the birds outside or feel the shoes on your feet, your attention swings over and instantly illuminates that sensory data. It creates this really powerful but totally false illusion that you were fully aware of everything all along.
Section 1. Dopamine is about surprise. Okay, so if our brain's working memory is essentially just a tiny spotlight that can only focus on a few things at once, it desperately needs a system to decide what's actually worth paying attention to. It needs to flag what matters. Now, we usually think of dopamine as just the pleasure chemical, right? But it's actually the math of surprise. It's driven by what researchers call a reward prediction error. That is simply the difference between what your brain expected to happen and what actually happened. Think about eating a slice of chocolate cake. That very first bite is a massive, unexpected rush of flavor. It's way better than your brain's vague prediction. That positive prediction error triggers a massive dopamine jackpot. But the second bite, well, your brain has already updated its expectations based on the first bite. The experience matches the prediction perfectly, so there's no error, and because of that, there's no special dopamine rush. The absolutely crucial takeaway here is that dopamine is not just about feeling good. It's an alerting mechanism for new information. Research from Mitsuko Watabe-Uchida's lab shows that dopamine neurons fire for a whole bunch of surprising triggers. Obviously, they fire for unexpected rewards, but novelty itself is fundamentally a prediction error generator. And even more surprisingly, they found that these neurons also fire in response to startling negative stimuli. Think of an unexpected loud noise or an uncomfortable puff of air in the face. Basically, the brain is using dopamine to yell, hey, something unpredicted just happened, update the model.
Section 2. Chemical balances and pro-social brains.
Now, dopamine doesn't run the show all on its own. It operates within this incredibly complex chemical ecosystem to balance our raw, kind of selfish drive for reward with our fundamental need for social connection. A really fascinating dynamic was recently published in Molecular Psychiatry looking at MDMA. While drugs like methamphetamine trigger this massive, unconstrained dopamine release that leads to high abuse potential, MDMA works a bit differently. It heavily releases serotonin, which interacts with specific receptors right inside the brain's reward center. You can kind of think of this serotonin as a biological brake. It limits and constrains the dopamine release, shifting the brain's priority away from just raw drug reward and toward highly pro-social, empathetic behaviors. It's a textbook example of neurochemical balancing. And this chemical balancing act completely dictates how we perceive the world based on our internal needs. Just imagine the difference between being in a sated state versus a thirsty state. This is the neuromodulatory architecture of receptivity. If you are entirely full and you see a cue for a reward, your brain essentially ignores it. There's zero behavioral engagement because you lack the underlying motivational drive to gate that signal. But if you're in a thirsty state, that exact same sensory cue triggers a massive, brain-wide wave of neural activity. We're talking rapid spreading across 34 distinct brain regions. Your internal chemistry is quite literally determining whether a piece of reality is completely invisible to you or the single most important thing in the world.
Section 3. Blending senses, bending time.
So how exactly does your brain weave all these totally disparate sensory inputs into one cohesive picture? Well, Sometimes it literally has to cheat. We call this cross-modal perception or sensory blending. A classic example is the ventriloquist effect in a movie theater. The speakers are scattered all around the room, right? Yet, when an actor speaks on screen, your brain completely overrides your audio localization data and forces you to hear the voice coming directly from their moving lips. Vision completely captures the audio, but it goes way beyond just sight and sound. Sound can strongly change how your brain perceives the taste and texture of food. It's this wild phenomenon called sonic seasoning. High-pitched musical notes can literally make your food taste sweeter, while deep, low bass sounds make it taste more bitter. Ever wonder why tomato juice hits different on a flight? Loud ambient noise, like an airplane engine, actually dulls sweet and salty tastes while significantly boosting savory, umami flavors. Sound even hacks texture. The sharp crunch and snap of a bite tells your brain an apple is fresh, and the hissing sound of bubbles literally raises how fizzy a drink feels in your mouth. And for a tiny fraction of the population with a rare condition called lexical gustatory synesthesia, just hearing a specific word or sound automatically triggers a real, physical sense of taste in their mouth. Throw in the fact that visual inputs like a looming disc on a screen can cause time dilation, making you feel like a moment lasted much longer than it physically did, and you start to realize your brain is dynamically blending senses and bending time just to make the narrative fit. Section 4. The architecture of your reality. So, if our biology is this wonderfully malleable, how does it interact with the cultural environments we live in? Interestingly, specific cultural patterns can act as perfectly optimized behavioral cables designed to safely hack our neural architecture. Take what we can call the British vector. It combines specific traits to totally bypass our cognitive bottlenecks. First, the acoustic novelty of the accent provides a massive positive prediction error. That's the dopaminergic jackpot we talked about earlier. But raw excitement can be a little overwhelming, so it's paired with cultural understanding, which acts as optimized pro-social gating. It essentially delivers the information without triggering a defensive crash in the listener. And finally, politeness acts as a neurochemical cooling buffer. It's just a brilliant example of how a cultural aesthetic can perfectly align with our neurochemical hardware to command attention and foster connection, completely safely. And the crazy part is, these sensory inputs don't just pass through us, they physically change us. Highly engaging, socially synchronized sensory inputs, like music, aren't just fleeting thoughts in your mind. Because they link affective salience and reward, they actually produce experience-dependent neural adaptations. They cause permanent structural connectivity alterations in your brain through neuroplasticity. The realities we repeatedly engage with physically reshape our neural networks and ultimately our very identities. Which brings us perfectly to our core theme today, summarized beautifully by researcher Andreas Kleinschmidt. He notes, the brain constructively interprets sensory input. As brain states fluctuate, so does perception of a given sensory input. Your reality is absolutely not a passive recording of the outside world. It is an active, fluctuating, continuously negotiated interpretation built by a brain that is juggling memory limits, chasing dopamine surprises, buffering with serotonin, and letting vision override sound just to make the story make sense. Which leaves us with this final, genuinely profound question to consider. If your brain is actively editing your timeline, constantly recalibrating your rewards, structurally rewiring itself based on experience, and quite literally blending your senses together to create a cohesive narrative, what part of your reality is actually objective? It is a fascinating thought to take with you today. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember to keep questioning the reality right in front of your eyes.